Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my Twitch stream. My name is Astrology, and I am here tonight to go over the chart of an incredible performer and cultural icon, Lady Gaga. So I'm glad that you're able to join me tonight for this amazing chart. Now, I went through a number of other possible celebrities for tonight, but many of them don't have a timed birth chart. And the challenge with someone who doesn't have a birth time is that we don't have any of the house data, we don't have the rising sign, so there's a lot less for us to talk about. Certainly enough to fill an hour, but I'd rather have the opportunity to look at the houses and really dive into the chart a little bit deeper instead of doing a more surface level, which is what I usually have to do when I have somebody who does not have a time. At any rate, let's take a look at some of our beginning pieces. First one we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the elements. So once again, we have someone with a singleton. Actually, in this case, a void, excuse me. We have Lady Gaga, who has a void. So she has no planets in Earth. Wow, what am I on tonight? Air, okay? She has no air sign planets. What this will often do is it will often cause someone to lack objectivity. It can make people a little bit more rigid. In some cases, it can make them a little bit less creative, although I don't think Lady Gaga has that problem. But when you lack an element, remember that you are likely looking at relationships with people who have that element to fill that void for you. So again, not uncommon to have a void. It's interesting that a lot of the folks we've done on this channel have either a singleton or a void, or in some cases both. But Lady Gaga does have a void in air. She has no air planets in the chart. 4 fire, 2 earth, and 4 water is the count. All right, well, let's head back over and let's look at her rising sign, as we normally would. All right, rising sign is going to be 27 Gemini. Rising Gemini people look at the world through connections and information. Gemini rising can imbue somewhat of a chatterbox mentality. This is a person who likes to communicate, who sees themselves as a communicator, who wants to express themselves well, someone who takes information seriously, someone who's likely rather curious. But when people see you and you have a Gemini rising, likely they see you as smart. One particular person in my life, one of my mentees, she's Taurus sun, but she has a Gemini rising, and just incredibly smart, gifted person. So will often see that with Gemini rising. Gemini is a double-bodied sign, like Pisces is. Okay. Now, with Gemini rising, the planet that we have to look at is Mercury. So let's look at the ruling planet Mercury here. And we have Mercury up here in the 10th house in Pisces. Okay. Mercury does not perform particularly well in Pisces because Mercury deals with verbal communication and information. It deals with logic and things that are right in front of your face. Pisces is not a sign that works well with that type of information. Pisces does really well with intuitive things, things that are subtle, things that are easily missed. It deals with energy levels, less on words. It doesn't really have things at face value. Okay, and so when you're talking about someone with Pisces, with Mercury in Pisces, they may have difficulty communicating in your average, normal, run-of-the-mill ways. Especially considering in this case, not only do we have Pisces in Mercury in Pisces, which is in its detriment, but also we have Pisces retrograde as well. Now, we've talked about retrograde Mercury in a chart before. Let me reiterate that about 20% of people have this, so it's not particularly rare, but it can force communication more inward rather than outward. A lot of folks with Mercury retrograde do deal with anxiety and sometimes tripping over their words and not knowing which thought to work with first. They may feel overwhelmed at times or anxious. And so when we see a planet like Mercury really debilitated, like it is, and then retrograde, we have to wonder kind of how she's going to express herself. Now, the key for this one is in the sign of Pisces, because Pisces is a Neptune-ruled sign, and we are going to talk about Neptune later tonight for sure, because that's an important part of the chart. But it means that for her, the ways that she communicates are much more subtle and imaginative. One of the best things about Pisces as a sign is it's very imaginative and creative. And considering the body of work that she's put out, I would say it's pretty obvious how Mercury in Pisces retrograde fares in this chart. This is the setup for a songwriter, because Neptune, the ruling planet of Pisces, is the planet of music. This is the planet. This is a planet that picks up subtle cues. This is a planet that, with Mercury in Pisces, we have someone who keys in on sensitive things. Things don't need to be overt for her to understand. Again, it may mean that on a mundane level, she might have difficulty communicating, but on a subconscious level, she'll pick up all kinds of energy very, very easily with that. Now, so that's our Mercury retrograde in Pisces. It's here in the 10th, so it also indicates that there is a relationship to the career here in this house. And I mean, obviously, communication is a big part of her career. And how does she communicate? Well, it's Mercury in Pisces. Once again, it's through poetry, it's through songwriting, it's through music itself. So, makes sense. Okay, we'll take a look at the sun next. All right, so we have the sun in Aries in this chart in the 11th house. Now, the sun's job is to become. So, no matter what sign you are, remember that the job of the sun stays the same. The job is to become. In Lady Gaga's case, her job is to become Aries. And when I say become, I mean learn to embrace the most positive qualities of Aries as a sign. Aries is passionate. Aries is a go-getter. Aries is a sign that won't back down from a fight. Aries is an independent sign. Aries is a sign of leadership. One of the most famous Aries people I can think of is Thomas Jefferson. Aries folks will go where other people fear to tread, if you will. And so this is not a surprise for someone like her. Now, what is interesting, though, is that it's in the 11th house. And the 11th house deals with groups of people, but it also deals with being progressive. It deals with humanitarian efforts. It deals with organizations and clubs and teams that we belong to. And so she is going to want to make a positive impact on the world as a whole. Like, that's going to be something that's going to be important to her. And the fact that she also has Venus in Aries there is something we will talk about as well. But I also want you to keep in mind that when we talk about the sun in Aries is in exaltation. So when we're looking at what we call dignity and debility in a chart, okay, every planet has 4 placements that stick out for either positive reasons or not so positive reasons. If a planet is in a sign that it rules, then it's in rulership, and it's very powerful. Once again, as I've said on this channel a number of times, it's not good or bad, it's just powerful. A planet that is in the sign of its exaltation, in this case, the sun in Aries, is great. I like to think of it like being at your best friend's house or the honored guest. It oftentimes will bring opportunities to you that you didn't realize. And all you have to do, in this case, because it's the sun, is shine, and opportunities come her way. But Sun and Aries people really do have an advantage because that sun exalted really will help bring opportunities their way. And all they usually have to do is pretty much sit there and wait for it. Hey, One True Cripple, good evening. Thanks for joining us. So when we're talking about the sun in Aries, I want you to realize that this is a pretty powerful position. And I know, an average of 1 out of every 12 people in the world has Aries sun. If you have Aries sun and you are not out there pushing for the things that you want, shame on you, because you really ought to be. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And yes, the dancing ducks are pretty awesome, One True Cripple. I have to say, I've never had dancing ducks on my stream before. That's a new one. So, but not too unusual, I guess. So let's look at. I make that aside because I talk about dignity and debility on this channel a lot, and I haven't really gone into the details of it because it can get a little bit complicated. I don't want to put anybody off, but know that if you have the sun in Aries, the sun is exalted in Aries, and it already has an advantage. You get more of the good parts of the sun and less of the bad stuff. Now, if I move on a little bit, we've talked about planets in fall before, and if you have a planet in fall, and the sun, for example, it's in its fall in Libra, then the sun is going to be a little bit debilitated. It's not necessarily going to perform as well. If you have the sun in detriment, which means if you were born with the sun in Aquarius, it means that the sun is there, but it's hidden behind the clouds. It still is powerful, but it's not as obviously self-directed. It's more directed at groups and making the world better than it is itself. So when I get to a place where I see a planet that's in dignity or debility, I typically mention it and try to explain it so you know. But one of the best ways to learn astrology is to learn the dignities and debilities so they start to pop out off the chart right away for you. Anyway, this is the sun exalted in Aries. Okay, so we've talked about Mercury. Let's look at the moon. Okay, so speaking of planets that have a dignity or debility, the moon in Scorpio is one that we have talked about before. I think the most recent one was Katy Perry, the triple Scorpio. The moon in Scorpio can be very challenging. It is the fall position of the moon. It's very intense. It can have a vengeful side. It can have a jealous side, an envious side. It can bring out a lot of the negative emotions that we think about. And when you're dealing with a Scorpio moon, you may find that your emotions are just are a lot more strong than perhaps those of other people. When you feel them, they can hit you kind of like a tidal wave. And because of that, you may be influenced to do things that you shouldn't do. Remember, the stars don't make you do anything, right? St. Augustine said the stars impel, but they cannot compel. Astrology can't make you do anything, folks. It's a set of tendencies that kind of poke at you, and you have to decide how you want to play your astrological hand, if you will. But when I see the moon in Scorpio in the 5th house, so we've talked a little bit about this before on the channel, but Scorpio is the most sexual of all the signs. And when you have the moon in Scorpio, there is a tendency to make physical intimacy a lot more important in your life than perhaps it normally would be, or even should be, although should is a term that I hesitate to use for a lot of reasons. But when I see the moon in Scorpio and it's in the 5th house, this is a real nod toward sexuality as a whole, because the 5th house is about our love affairs, and it's the 1st house of what we call the sexual profile. And so when we're talking about this stuff, remember that the moon in Scorpio, because Scorpio is such a sign that deals with physical intimacy, to have the moon there in the 5th house really brings out that quality. If I were a person who, if I were talking to Lady Gaga, if she were a client of mine, this is something that I would probably drill in on pretty well, for a couple reasons. One, because of its position in the fifth house. Two, of course, because it's right next to Pluto, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I also want to talk about mom, because the moon, as you may or may not remember, the moon represents mom and our relationship with mom. And when you have a Scorpio moon, you have a tendency to have a relationship with your maternal unit, if you will, that is more intense than others. Again, as I've said before, intense doesn't mean bad. I mean, I'm a Scorpio. I'm not going to say intense is bad. That's ridiculous. But intense could be positive or it could be negative. So we keep that in mind. But also, this moon represents how a woman will also handle the birth process. So, folks, if you're having children, you may want to take a look at what your moon sign is before you start going into labor, because that'll give you an idea of how the birth process for any child that you have is going to go. Okay? But the moon is about nurturing, which is why mom is very much involved in it. So I'm guessing that Lady Gaga probably had a very intense relationship with mom. Good or bad, not really sure, but that's kind of where I would start. And I have other clients with the moon in Scorpio, one in particular who has Scorpio moon, who is a very challenging relationship with mom. It sometimes is okay, but most of the time it's not great. And that's with the moon in Scorpio, there is a tendency to go that way. Once again, I also have another moon in Scorpio client who is happily married, seems to have a good relationship with mom. You know, it's not always true, which is why we talk to the client. But when you see the moon in Scorpio, a little red flag should go up in your mind to kind of dive into that part of the person and find out who they are, how they are living their chart emotionally. Now, what makes this even more intense and perhaps more intensely sexual, although not necessarily, is what's right next door, which is Pluto. Okay, we've talked in the past on this channel about conjunctions. A conjunction is a set of two planets that are within 7 degrees of each other. In this particular case, the moon and Pluto have a conjunction. They are conjunct, as we would say. Their energies are blending. Here's where this gets super, super interesting. We have Pluto in Scorpio and the moon in Scorpio. Pluto in Scorpio is Scorpio in rulership. It's in its most powerful sign of the zodiac. Okay, so we've got that going for us already. And it's right next to this very intense moon in Scorpio. When we see moon Pluto conjunct like this, we would often ask the question about the relationship with mom, but also how the person nurtures. Because Pluto is about power, straight up power. This could be someone who exerts a lot of power and influence over other people. This is a person who might experience not just your standard Scorpio moon emotions, which are already very intense, but even over the top emotions. Now, here's one of the good parts. The fifth house does deal with sexual affairs, yes, and sex we have for fun. But it also deals with creativity and celebrity. Okay? The fifth house is a place where we often see people who are celebrities have a lot of placements. The fifth house is the fun house. The fifth house is, as I said, creativity and performance. Performance is another part of the fifth house. And so I am not surprised that Lady Gaga performs on her own. She's other than her backup musicians, she's a solo artist generally. And you're going to find that people who have a heavy fifth house will often perform in some way on their own. In this case, very, very intensely in Scorpio. So her ability to perform does not surprise me at all. There's one other piece of that fifth house that I'm going to throw out there as well. And my mentor, Kathy Rose, has a great explanation for it. She talks about the fifth house being the house of love given. In other words, how we express our love to others. I suspect that with this setup here, Lady Gaga has some very, very close people that are ride or die. She probably has a lot of acquaintances, but for a few people, she would die for them. And that's really the intensity of that Pluto-Moon conjunction. Now, it could also manifest in a very controlling way. This is a person who might want to control the people that are close to her. And Scorpio, as much as, I'm a Scorpio sun, and I can tell you that Scorpio definitely has its share of dirty tricks, especially on an emotional level. One of them is manipulation. And a lot of times with Scorpios, to kind of maintain or stay in control or regain what they think is control, Scorpio folks will manipulate other people. With this placement, I could absolutely see that as a possibility. Again, not always going to happen, but at what level is the person living the chart? Okay, if they're using control and emotional manipulation, especially because remember, Scorpio is a water sign. Okay, there's a lot of emotion there. If the person is using emotional things like manipulation to control people, that's also a possible direction this could go. But ideally, those of us who are Scorpio suns anyway, we try to get out of that habit early, because eventually Scorpio folks realize that they can't control everybody; they can only control themselves. And with this setup, hopefully Lady Gaga has figured that out too. But yeah, this is one of the most intense. This is one of the most intense aspects of the whole chart right here. All right, let's take a look at. Before we leave Mom, actually, let's go to the fourth house. So, as I've said before, the fourth house is Mom and motherhood. And you're going to notice that in Lady Gaga's chart, it is untenanted. It doesn't have any planets in it at all. So when, as astrologers, we see a house that's untenanted, we do two things. We look at the sign on the cusp to tell us about the affairs of the house, and we look at the ruling planet. So this is 3 Virgo is where the cusp of the fourth house is. By the way, we also call that cusp of the fourth house the IC, or Imoncelli in Latin. We also talk about it as the nadir, okay, the lowest point on the chart. And the IC deals with Mom, but also deals with the family as a whole. When you have Virgo here, again, Virgo is a planet that does have some perfectionistic tendencies. It can be extremely critical. It can also be very sensible and very practical. So it's possible that from her mom, she got very sensible and practical advice, but from someone who might have been very critical. What makes this jump out even more is because the ruling planet of Virgo, which many of you already know, is Mercury. And so once again, we have another nod to that Mercury in Pisces in a detriment that is also retrograde. So what does that mean? It means that the fourth house is not probably a great place for Lady Gaga as a whole. It probably isn't. And so I suspect that her relationship with her mom was very intense and not in a good way. But again, I would have to talk to her to be 1,000% sure. Based on this, though, my tendency would be to say, yeah, probably with Mom, not so much. All right, let's look at Venus next. Okay, we have Venus up here in the 11th. Now we're going to notice that Venus is not conjunct the Sun in this case. They're too far apart. And how do you know? You look at the numbers. So this is 7 degrees of Aries. This is 24 degrees of Aries. Okay. There's 17 degrees of difference there. So these two planets are not conjunct. They don't blend in this chart. They're in the same sign, yes, but they're not conjunct. Okay? So as you start looking at charts a little bit more deeply, you're going to find that the numbers, the degree numbers are pretty important. Now, I know many of you have said to me, like, John, that's the math. That's the nerdy stuff. Like, I don't need to do that. Like, that's fine. Just look at the numbers. Remember, there's only 30 degrees in each sign. So if you look and see the numbers are only a few apart in a given sign, you know you've got a conjunction to work with. Okay. So we have Venus. Venus, the planet of values. Venus, the planet of love and money, as well as possessions. Okay, when you have Venus in a Mars-ruled sign, in this case, Venus in Aries, but also, because remember, Scorpio's ancient ruler was Mars. If you have Venus in Scorpio, like I do, you have Venus in detriment. Venus struggles here because the value, remember, Venus is about values, what the person values tends to be quick and fleeting and requiring stimulation. Okay? This is someone who likes to get a quick buck, likes to get quick impact. In relationships, it can be falling in and out of love very, very quickly. It can be a focus on the physical of a relationship, because remember, Mars, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will, Mars rules both of these planets, okay, through the sign of Aries, and Mars is the planet of physical intimacy and using the physical body. So Venus in Aries is going to struggle some. Again, doesn't mean that they won't have good relationships. It just means that they have to understand that their tendency, again, we use that word, the tendency is going to be for them to pursue relationships that are exciting and not necessarily viable or long-term. Everybody, a lot of people like a good fling, and Venus in Aries, you could have a very intense, torrid affair with somebody that doesn't last particularly long when you have Venus in Aries, and then move on. One of these, don't call me, I'll call you kind of situations. Nothing wrong with it, but it can make valuing partners long-term a little bit more difficult. Aries is a cardinal sign, and it's a fast-moving sign. Contrast that with Venus in Scorpio. When you have Venus in Scorpio, you are looking for, the one person to complete you, that you can really hang on to and value. And as someone who is Venus in Scorpio, I can tell you that one of the things that as a kid, before I got married, I never dated more than one person at once because I felt like I had to have a connection with just the one person. Okay. So let's go to that Mars and let's find out how much influence he actually has, because in this chart he has quite a bit. All right, let's head right over to the 7th house. And we have Mars in Capricorn. Okay, one of the things that you're probably hearing from me a lot tonight is that there are a lot of planets with dignity and debility. Okay, a lot of planets that are either in rulership or exalted, or planets that are in fall. And just to give you an idea, we have Mars exalted in this chart in Capricorn. So I'm going to put an E here for exalted. If I go around the rest of this chart, I have the moon is in fall. I've got Pluto, which is in rulership. I have Venus, which is in detriment. I've got the sun, which is exalted. I've got Mercury, which is in detriment. And later on we'll talk about Jupiter. And I have Jupiter in rulership as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of her 10 planets are either in really good shape or not, or really not so good shape. This is a really interesting example because all of us have planets that are somewhat good and somewhat bad. In this case, you have a lot of extremes. Okay, you've got one planet in fall, and you've got a planet in detriment. You've got a third planet over here in detriment, and then you have 2 in rulership and 2 exalted. Okay, that's a lot. That's already a very intense chart. You see the extremes. In some ways, it's almost like a bipolar chart. Okay, and I don't mean to say that someone who has this would be bipolar, because we don't diagnose anyway, but this is a chart of extremes. I could see someone with this chart having difficulty finding the middle ground, especially given the fact that she's got 2 very intense Scorpio planets, and Scorpio is not a sign that does the middle ground really well. As my wife often says, I really need to find a dimmer switch, and I've been doing better at it, but it's not easy. But let's go back to Mars. Let's talk about Mars too. Okay, a couple important things here. So we have Mars. First of all, let me erase this. We have Mars within 3 degrees of the descendant. So already we know that Mars is going to be important because it's very close to an angle. Remember, any planet within 5 degrees of the ascendant, the descendant, the MC, the midheaven, or the IC, the Imum any planet within 5 degrees on either side of that line is going to be important in the chart. That's the first thing. The second thing we talked about earlier is we have Mars in Capricorn, which once again is exalted. Remember that Mars is kind of like Bam Bam from the Flintstones. Okay, his job is to go out and hit things and get things done. He's like your personal SWAT team. He is your physical body. If it's fight, flight, or freeze, this is the guy. If you are in a situation where, heaven forbid, you have to have a physical fight or you have to fight for your life, Mars is the guy who's going to step forward. As I've said before, Mars is important, but he's kind of a dumb jock. He's not smart. His job is pure instinct, and Mars is the planet of what you do with your physical body. So that includes not only physical intimacy, which we talked about, but also any job where you use your body as a big part of it. So this is your law enforcement and soldier. This is your bodybuilder. This is your professional athlete. This is also someone who models, potentially, could have a body, a very prominent Mars. And so when you're talking about Mars, Mars's job is to fight for us. Now, Mars in Capricorn will fight, but the great thing is that Mars in Capricorn is the strategist. Capricorn wants to see all the pieces out on the board and plan how they're going to fight. Mars in Capricorn will win you a war. It's very strategic about how it uses its energy. Okay? This is a person who isn't going to beat you necessarily because they're stronger. They're going to beat you with what they have, but they're going to use their advantages strategically. Okay? So we already know Mars is within 3 degrees of the descendant, which is important. We already know that Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Here's the other piece. Mars is at 0 degrees of a cardinal sign. And when we see Mars or any planet at 29 degrees of a mutable sign, or 0 or 1 degrees of a cardinal sign, we write this. We write AP for Aries point. Those cardinal points of the zodiac are very important. Remember that when a season starts, the sun hits one of those cardinal points. So coming up in just a few weeks or so, we have the sun that's going to be moving into Cancer. Astrological summer will begin. But when it hits that 0 Cancer mark, when the sun hits it, it's going to be important. It shows that the energy of the whole area is shifting. Okay? More than just moving from one sign to the next, this is changing of a season. Remember that mutable signs end a season, but every season begins with another cardinal sign. So we're now transitioning from spring into summer. Gemini is the sign that does it. But when a planet gets to 0 of a cardinal sign, it's important and it sticks out. So we have Mars at the AP at 0 Capricorn. So this one is one of the most powerful planets in the entire chart. Now, what makes this more interesting too is if we look across the way, take a look at this. As a reminder, I have 2 other planets over here that are Mars ruled. I've got the Sun and I've got Venus. Both of them are Mars ruled because both of them are in Aries, which is the ruling planet of Mars. So both, even though Venus in Aries is not particularly strong, kind of struggles, right? It's going to get some help because the ruling planet of Mars in this chart is so strong. And we already know that we've got a powerhouse sun with the sun in Aries, right? It's exalted, but it's being backed up by another exalted planet. I mean, that's fantastic for sun energy. And remember that the sun's job is to become, but also the sun is where you shine. And so with this chart, we can see someone who has a tremendous possibility to shine. As an aside, planets at the AP will often bring out fame or recognition. And when you are looking at that in someone's chart, the planet that's at the AP is something that Lady Gaga could be known for. And so in this particular case, we know that she's bisexual, but it could be the fact that she might be particularly aggressive or pushy or very ambitious. Like all of those things are possible with this particular setup. And those are things that she could be known for because we have Mars at the AP. Again, that's a very small brushstroke that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's important that I mention it. And it's easy to remember because there are really only 4 places in a chart where it's going to happen. Okay, and we've mentioned it on the channel before, but I always like to mention it when it comes up. But Mars here is the strategist. Mars wants to get things done, but it wants to get it done in a way that's cautious and controlled and effective and willing to wait until the right time to act. Because remember, Mars is about getting it done. Okay. All right, let's talk about Jupiter next. Jupiter's another one of those planets I mentioned a moment ago that is in dignity. Now, I know when you look at this, you're probably thinking, John, Jupiter is in Pisces here. Isn't Jupiter in rulership in Sagittarius? And the answer is yes, it absolutely is. Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces. Okay, remember that we didn't have telescopes until the 1700s. And when astrology has evolved over the years, as we've found new things, we've associated them with the signs. And so in 1848, Neptune was discovered. And not long after that, a modern astrologer said, oh, we're going to associate this new planet with Pisces, which makes an awful lot of sense, okay? But in the ancient world, Jupiter was the ruling planet of Pisces. And so we still consider this a planet in rulership. Still, even to this day. Okay, because I use both the classical and the modern rulers. And where is it? Well, it's within 5 degrees of, hello, the midheaven. Again, we call it the midheaven, medium celli in Latin. The midheaven is our career line. Jupiter's main job, folks, is to expand. Jupiter wants to make us bigger. Now, I gotta be honest. For people like me who have a very strong Jupiter, I am not a small man. Jupiter is part of the reason for that. Jupiter wants us to eat more, drink more, enjoy more, go deeper spiritually. He wants us to travel and enjoy things that are new to us. He always wants us to be growing on a spiritual level. He wants growth. And as I've said before, a lot of times people will favor Jupiter over many of the other planets because Jupiter brings things to them. Yeah, but Jupiter also brings lots of other things like debts, okay? And in my case, tumors. I had tumors on my liver a number of years ago, and one of them was really big. And while, astrology is a mitigating factor in a lot of things, I had big tumors. Jupiter actually rules tumors, and it rules the liver, where my tumors actually are. So when I found that out, I looked at my own chart and I thought, not really surprised by that. But anyway, that's a little bit of medical astrology. Medical astrology is its own discipline, and I am not an expert in it. I know just enough to be even moderately dangerous from time to time. But the point is that Jupiter is a natural ruler for Pisces and was for many, many years. So in the career, for you to have Jupiter in the house of career like this, first of all, it's awesome for what she does because Pisces is not only a Jupiter-ruled sign, but a Neptune-ruled sign. Neptune is the planet of music, and it's sitting in the career house. So this is not someone who is going to struggle to make money in music. This is someone who already has a significant astrological advantage in that area. Jupiter wants it big. And it's in a sign, Pisces, that it rules, but also that Neptune rules. And so, given all of that, I'm not really surprised that she is where she is. It really doesn't surprise me at all. But Jupiter can also go too far. So, as much as the ancients used to call Jupiter the greater benefic, in other words, the really big good guy, the best good guy, he has a tendency to bring a lot of growth that you don't necessarily need as well. He doesn't mean to, but that's how it is. Also, I will remind you that Jupiter is a planet that doesn't know how to say no. Basically, he only knows how to say yes. This often comes through with people who are Sagittarius folks because their sun is Jupiter ruled. One of the most challenging parts of Sagittarius that I've experienced is the overpromise and underdeliver. And that's Jupiter. It's nothing malicious, but it's, hey, I want to do so much more and I don't have the time for it, but I really don't know how to say no. And so that can be a challenge for some Sagittarius folks. But in this case, it's in the career house. It's in a very sensitive sign. And Jupiter is also a wealth planet, and it's sitting in the house of career. So this is a good setup for her. Okay. Let's look at Uranus. And while I normally talk about this kind of stuff anyway involving Uranus, it is Pride Month. And what you're going to find is a lot of folks who are interested in non-binary people, trans people, people of their own gender. And again, I am not here to call those relationships unconventional. Again, what society believes changes over time. Okay, but Lady Gaga does have Uranus within 5 degrees of this descendant. And just to remind you, the descendant is our relationship area of the chart. And so when I see Uranus in the 7th house, in the 8th house, on the descendant, or I see Aquarius on the descendant or on the cusp of the 8th house, you will often see people who not only fit in the LGBTQ plus category, but also people who are comfortable with relationships that others would consider unconventional, or that society would consider unconventional. So this is ethical non-monogamy, this is thruples, this is polyamory, this is relationships of more than one person, however you want to categorize it. But this is someone who would be comfortable in that sort of situation. And the fact that she's bi is not really a surprise. And once again, I'll rep my friend Chris Renstrom, who's a wonderful astrologer, who posted who did a lecture a number of years ago that's called "Does Uranus Make Me Gay?" And it's one of the best I've heard in a long time. But yes, with this here, and in very freedom-loving Sagittarius, I'm not at all surprised that she has come out and said she's bi. Yeah, not surprised at all. And again, I know very little about her personal life, but if she's involved with multiple people, again, that wouldn't shock me at all either. She's probably very comfortable with that situation. Uranus is not a planet that does well with clingy, and especially not with Uranus and Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the sign of don't fence me in, pretty much the ultimate freedom sign. And so long-term, one-to-one, conventional relationships like a marriage, she may not be conducive to those. Those might not be ones that she would gravitate to. All right, now let's go back to Neptune. We haven't talked about him yet, but let's do so now. Okay, we have Neptune here in Capricorn. Neptune is very much a generational planet, so there are going to be millions of you with Neptune in a sign at a given time. What is more significant in this case for me is that we have Neptune conjunct Mars. Mars is the guy who gets stuff done, right? Neptune's our music planet. What's her motivation going to be? Well, it's going to be the arts. It's going to be music. It's going to be dance. It's going to be subtle things. It's going to be things that require a lot of sensitivity. With that powerful Mars there, I am not at all surprised at her choice of career, but also that she's so motivated. Mars is about motivation to do it. Now, from a relationship perspective, these are both sitting in the 7th house of one-to-one relationships. Now, Neptune is too far away from the descendant to be considered on the descendant for me. It's not, so it doesn't have as much of an impact as Mars does, but it is conjunct Mars. So there is going to be a blending of those two energies in this chart. One of the challenges with Mars and Neptune together is that Mars wants to be direct and take action, and Neptune goes, well, I don't know what we should do. Neptune kind of hides things. It can make progress very difficult. And with Neptune, we will often see people who lose their way. And so with Lady Gaga, she seems like a very motivated person, but I am very sure there are times when she just says, you know what, I'm not going to do anything for a while. I'm just gonna let go of this for a while. And you don't know when she's going to come back to it necessarily, but Neptune and Mars can have that effect together. But it also means that for her relationships, her one-to-one relationships, not just romantic, but her business partnerships as well, are going to be impacted by this. And if you have Neptune and Mars right there, Mars does have a tendency to be impulsive. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the past she made some very quick business decisions that were not the right ones because she wanted to see Neptune, right? The rose-colored glasses. She wanted to see a certain person or a certain situation in a certain way and wasn't willing to dig deeper. Just said, on the surface it looks good. and then didn't dive any deeper. So that could be a more negative tendency with these two together. Now, one of the planets that we don't often get to, especially when we're dealing with celebrity charts, is Saturn. And we have some time tonight, so let's look at Saturn. Alrighty. Remember that Saturn and Jupiter are opposites. As I said earlier, Saturn's the guy who can't say no. Jupiter is the guy who can never say no. Saturn is the guy who almost never says yes. Saturn is in a Jupiter-ruled sign here, folks. Saturn in Sagittarius. That can be a challenging position because Saturn's job is boundaries. And Sagittarius is a sign that pushes boundaries. They want the freedom to go where they want to go, do what they want to do. They don't want to be restrained. But Saturn goes, whoa, you got to, no. So there can be almost like a push-pull between these two when you're dealing with Saturn in Sagittarius. This is a person who might have trouble with boundaries because the freedom or giving other people the freedom to do what they want might override the person's boundaries. Now, I will also say that we've got this set up in the 6th house too. And I don't want to say that some houses are better than others. They're all important. But one of the things you're going to notice is that the houses that are closest to the angles, right? In this case, we have 1, 4, 7, and 10. Those houses are called angular houses. And things sitting in an angular house are visible. I'm not necessarily going to say more powerful or have a greater impact. Sometimes it does work out that way. But they're visible. In other words, everyone around you can see them. Everyone around Lady Gaga can see, how assertive she can be. That's an easy one. But when you have a planet like this in the 6th house, that 6th house is a place, we call it a cadent house. Okay, so all the houses are either angular, succedent, or cadent. So for example, the 3rd house is a cadent house, the 2nd house is a succedent house, and the 1st house is an angular house. As you go this way, as you go from angular to succedent to cadent, things get more buried and might have less of an impact as you go more toward the cadent houses. So the fact that she has Saturn in the 6th house might make it very easy for her to ignore boundaries. And with Saturn in Sagittarius, it makes it a little bit more difficult to establish and maintain healthy boundaries anyway. But that's a situation where the house placement can make a planet that is not particularly good even a little bit worse because it's out of the mainstream really. And as we look at this, as I look at Neptune, one of the other things that we can see, take a look at where the Sun is and take a look at where Neptune is. We have a 90-degree angle between the Sun and Neptune. Okay? That 90-degree angle is something that we would probably expect in someone who is a singer. But one of the tendencies with Saturn-Neptune connections, like the square, is that it's harder to see the self clearly. Identity questions will often come up. Also, Neptune is the planet of addiction. So when I see this in a chart, I will often ask a client if their family or if the client themselves has had a problem with addiction or has an addictive personality. With Neptune, that can be a pretty common thing depending on how it's set up. But it's connected to the sun. Remember, the sun's the life force. Any planet that's connected to the sun is going to affect you and your overall life force. In my case, I have the sun unaspected, so I don't have that problem. It brings up different challenges, but I don't have a connection from my sun to any other planet. In this particular case, we have Neptune that does have a connection to the sun. And of course, Neptune is conjunct Mars. We already know that. But Neptune also has a positive connection to Jupiter as well. And it's about a 60-degree angle between Neptune and Jupiter. And a sextile is an opportunity angle. In other words, it's a place where you can see opportunities for success between the two planets. I was talking earlier about how Jupiter makes everything bigger. Well, Jupiter increases Neptune because of this connection and shows opportunities for both financial growth and artistic growth. So for her, that actually works out very, very well to have that connection. Folks, we are almost out of time. You can always talk more about a chart, but I am happy to take a moment and answer any questions about Lady Gaga's chart that you might have that I can answer. All right, folks. Well, hearing none, that concludes my stream for this week. As always, I am exceptionally grateful that you have joined me. I hope you're enjoying the streams. I will post this stream in its entirety later in the week. I have also been trying to finish up some of the edits to some of the other streams. I still have a Taylor Swift or two stream left. I haven't even touched Kevin Hart or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson yet. I still have to edit those, but you can always find the raw streams out on my social medias. In this case, specifically YouTube, you can find that one out there, and I hope you enjoy them. In any case, I hope you are enjoying Pride Month. Enjoy every second of it, folks, and I look forward to seeing you next week. If you have suggestions for folks for Pride Month that you'd like to see on the channel, I'd love to hear from you. As always, thank you so much, and remember, the chart is where you start.